Greetings and welcome back to our Talks with Walt. We now turn in our study of each of the poems of Walt Whitman's Leaves of Grass to the section called Children of Adam. We're going to look at a poem called Spontaneous Me. It was first published as the 28th poem in the second edition of the 56th edition, and it was originally titled Bunch Poem. Now we're going to talk about why he would call it originally that. And in some ways, it is a title that seems strange, but it's going to work pretty well. Bunch, as in cluster of images, right? And then by 1867, we have the title, as we now have it, Spontaneous Me. Hey, can we say this out loud? It seems like really good poets and writers, and maybe we even say this of teachers, have this tendency to make everything look as if everything that they're doing is kind of random, spontaneous. Hey, I got this idea. What are your thoughts? But really gifted writers are the ones who understand the importance of intentionality. So even though Whitman's going to play a game of being really spontaneous, I'm going to make the argument that when we look at poems like this one, it's pretty obvious to us he had a real serious agenda in mind, and he's going to play that one out with some pretty serious intentionality. Now, our assumptions that you've been following our stuff at learnstrong.net, down the left-hand side, Talks with Walt, everything from the inscriptions all the way to the last poem that we worked with, A Woman Waits for Me. Now, the background material here is, I think, fascinating. I want to start, as we often have done, going back into Song of Myself. And do you remember these lines from 44? Now, of course, we've given full exegesis of this, so I'm just going to enjoy the reading of it. He says in 44, "It's time to explain myself. Let us stand up. What is known, I strip away. I launch all men and women forward with me into the unknown." The clock indicates the moment. But what does eternity indicate? We have thus far exhausted trillions of winters and summers. There are trillions ahead and trillions ahead of them. Births have brought us richness and variety, and other births will bring us richness and variety. I do not call one greater and one smaller. That which fills its period and place is equal to any. Were mankind murderous or jealous upon you, my brother, my sister? I'm sorry for you. They are not murderous or jealous upon me. All has been gentle with me. I keep no account with lamentation. What have I to do with lamentation? I am an acme of things accomplished, and I am an encloser of things to be. My feet strike an apex of apices of the stairs. On every step, bunches of age and larger bunches between the steps, all below, duly traveled, and still I mount and mount, rise after rise, bow the phantoms behind me. And we'll stop there. I want to concentrate just for a moment on that bunches word, and we're going to play the game then with the title. Now, Norton's tells us that this poem was originally called Bunch Poem, after, of course, the final image that we will get to. And it appeared, as we said, in the 56th edition. This poem became number 5 of the Children of Adam group in 1860 and 67. It took its present title from the first line, which was added in 1860. Another edition of 1860, the phrase "my Adamic and fresh daughters" relates to the Adam image which informs the whole group. So as we pointed out in earlier lectures, Children of Adam. Intense and frank, we are told by Norton's, in sexual imagery, it's remarkable for its time. In his blue copy revisions of the 1860 edition, Whitman had marked the 10th line for deletion, but he retained it and indeed marked the poem satisfactory of January 65. So as we turn now to the poem itself, we're going to enjoy the spontaneous nature of nature, and we're immediately going to, of course, think of Ralph Waldo Emerson. We've given full lectures on his essays, including, of course, the essay Nature itself. Let's just read now a few lines. I wish I had time to be able to read the entire poem and then to come back to outline. But let's read a few lines and just kind of enjoy as we do this. Spontaneous me, nature. Notice the repetition now of all the anaphora of all of these. The loving day, we're going to hear the word love get used over and over. It's 14 times in a row it's going to get used. Some have called this the love poem of Whitman. The loving day, the mounting sun, the friend I'm happy with. He loves that phraseology, doesn't he? The arm of my friend hanging idly over my shoulder. It's such a beautiful, carefree image, and of course it makes us think about those singing boys of I Hear America Singing. The hillside whitened with blossoms of the mountain ash. Notice we go from the personal human to the personal as in non-human, right? The hillside whitened with blossoms of the mountain ash. We pointed out already the power of the word blossoms, right? The same late in autumn, so we're moving from the spring to the autumn, so notice the cyclical nature of this poem. The hues of, now we're going to get all our colors, red, yellow, drab, purple, and light and dark green. The rich coverlet of the grass, of course, for a poem collection called Leaves of Grass, it makes sense. Animals and birds, we're going to come back to them again. The private, we're going to come to this. Untrimmed bank. The primitive apples, we're going to come back to them. The pebble stones, beautifully dripping fragments. He loves this word dripping. The negligent list of one after another as I happen to call them to me or think of them. This call them to me is a powerful image, and he's going to bring up or resurrect all these images, right? The real poems, as opposed to what he'll call merely pictures. We immediately think of Plato here, right? And Republic 7. The real poems, what we call poems being merely pictures. The poems of the privacy of the night. And of men like me. He's going to use this phrase a couple of times. And we have to ask, who are men like Whitman? Now, of course, poetically, we'll have to say very, very few. But what does he mean by men like me? Well, obviously, we're going to have to speculate. Men like me. This poem, drooping, he loves that phrase. He loves that word, drooping, right? Shy and unseen, that I always carry and that all men carry. Whitman has this genius ability to reach down into himself and to pull out information that looks a whole lot like what a lot of us, of course, understand and deal with. And he's going to share that in really provocative ways. He says, the poem, drooping, shy, and unseen, that I always carry and that all men carry. And then in parentheses, making us think again of so many earlier times when he's done this in parenthetics. No one's for all. Avowed on purpose, wherever our men like me are lusty, lurking, masculine, all those L sounds, poems. And then he begins with the word love. It's brilliant. Watch, 14 times he plays around with the word love. Love thoughts, love juice, love odor, love yielding, love climbers and the climbing sap, arms and hands of love, lips of love, phallic thumb of love. I can't impress on you. I mean, obviously today this is not that big of a deal, but when this is first published, this is radical, radical poetry. Phallic thumb of love, breasts of love, bellies pressed and glued together with love, earth of chaste love. Now that use of that word chaste, I'm hoping you're annotating your own edition. That is an interesting word, that word chaste. We'll come back to it later in the poem. Life that is only life after love. The body of my love, the body of the woman I love, taking us, of course, back to an earlier poem. The body of the man, the body of the earth. Notice the repetition of the word body here, right? Soft forenoon airs that blow from the southwest. I mean, this sounds like something lifted from Thoreau's Walden, right? And then he gives us this amazing word picture of the bee. Now, reminding us, of course, of the idea that takes us all the way back to the early Romans and Virgil and his love of bees and the Georgics and all of that. The hairy wild bee that murmurs and hankers up and down, that grips the full-grown lady flower, the lady slipper, curves upon her with amorous firm legs, takes his will of her, and holds himself tremulous and tight till he's satisfied. We've seen some of these images earlier in Children of Adam poems. The wet of woods, through the early hours, and then he moves from a non-human natural kind of view, bees, to brilliantly and beautifully crafted imagery here of two sleepers at night. Two sleepers at night laying close together as they sleep, one with an arm slanting down across and below the waist of the other. I told you how much he loves this word waist. The smell of the apples, aromas from crushed sage plant, mint, birch bark, And then all of a sudden he moves from, and we've said this, the way that he is able to show this imagery of the group and then pull it back and then refocus it again. Now we're to a single boy. The boy's longings. Remember this collection of poems, Children of Adam, right? The boy's longings, the glow and pressure as he confides to me what he was dreaming. When we pick up the poem Sleepers, we'll play this game all over again in brilliant ways. The dead leaf, whirling its spiral whirl and falling still and content to the ground. That's a brilliant line crafted in terms of 2B. Just read it out loud and notice that spiraling sense as it's falling. The dead leaf, whirling its spiral whirl. Hear all these L sounds, and falling still and content to the ground. The no form stings. Watch the word sting as it gets used here. That sights, people, objects sting me with. The hubbed sting of myself. We've seen this hubbed in passage 48 of Song of Myself. The hubbed sting of myself, stinging me as much as it ever can anyone. And then he begins to speak in lists. The sensitive, orbic, underlapped brothers, that only privileged feelers may be intimate where they are. The brilliant line, privileged feelers, right? The curious, he loves that word. The curious roamer. We're going to come back to this roamer in Song of the Open Road, afoot and lighthearted. The curious roamer, the hand roaming all over the body. The bashful, we're going to come back to it with fleshes and fleshes here in a little bit. The bashful withdrawing of flesh, where the fingers soothingly pause and edge themselves. And then back to more L sounds. The limpid liquid within the young man. The vexed coercion, so pensive and so painful. This idea of vexed. So notice this dance, and it is a dance. I mean, this is brilliant poetry. Notice it's a dance between, on the one hand, sheer joy and, of course, torment, the moving back and forth, the sexual eroticism that these lines will obviously be playing with. The torment, the irritable tide that will not be at rest. This is the idea for Whitman of all dynamic growth, right? The like of the same I feel, the like of the same in others, and then we're back to the young man again. The young man that wakes deep at night, the hot hand seeking to repress what would master him. And it's possible that this autoerotic kind of language we've seen before in Song of Myself, it coming back now. The mystic amorous night, the strange half-welcome pangs, visions, sweats, all of this we've seen in previous language. That echoing that so much of Leaves of Grass is about. The pulse pounding through palms, here are all the P's, and trembling encircling fingers, the young man all colored red, ashamed, angry. Obviously, who is this young man? As Whitman asked, a man like me, he says it earlier. The souse upon me of my lover the sea. And this will sound very much like Lord Byron's Childe Harold's Pilgrimage, right? In that passage in regards to playing wanton with the waves. We talked about this at learnstrong.net elsewhere. The souse upon me of my lover the sea as I lie willing and naked, the merriment of the twin babes. And then all of a sudden he just shifts. And he moves from that image to another bunch, to another cluster of powerful images. And he loves this image of the mother and the children, the merriment of the twin babes that crawl over the grass in the sun. Of course, this poem is buried in a collection called Leaves of Grass. The mother never turning her vigilant eyes from them. And then we're going to talk about trees and nuts. The walnut trunk, the walnut husks, and the ripening or ripened long round walnuts. The continents of vegetables, birds, animals, all dynamic growth. The consequent meanness of me, should I skulk or find myself indecent, while birds and animals never once skulk or find themselves indecent. Go back to our Song of Myself, passage 32, and our conversation there. But as well, think about how we're back to our Chaucer and the opening lines of the Canterbury Tales general prologue, so nature doth prick them and all of that, right? The great chastity, we saw that word earlier, right? Of paternity to match the great chastity of maternity. The oath of procreation I have sworn. Now, in some ways, this is, and I think, and as we've said, I think Whitman's very influenced by Chaucer, and I think he is making a very subtle argument. Hey, I am writing about some controversial stuff, but I have to write about it because I've made an oath to, of course, he would argue, myself and to the American people, and of course the people of the world. By the time we get to Passage to India, it will be, he believes, readers all over the world. The oath of procreation I've sworn. And there it is, my Adamic and fresh daughters. We are obviously in the Children of Adam section. The greed, it's a fascinating use of this word, that eats me day and night with hungry gnaw. Go back and look at the way he uses this word picture of gnawing or longing, right? Till I saturate what shall produce boys to fill my place when I am through. Poets to come, we've seen this idea that Whitman was so involved in the idea of legacy. And then he uses this word wholesome. The wholesome relief, repose, repetition of these R sounds, content, and this bunch. Of course, again, from Song of Myself, passage 44, the bunch a word gets used. And this bunch, plucked at random, that is to say spontaneous. From myself, Song of Myself immediately comes to mind. It, that is to say this bunch, this collection, has done its work. I toss it carelessly to fall where it may, as if he's throwing the poem out to us. And it's like that leaf that kind of finds its way to the floor. Well, this is amazing poetry. What are we going to do in terms of 2A and messages? Well, obviously the dynamism of nature. It is his oath to write about it and to share it. Nature is energy, and it's good, and it's right. That is to say, it's not sinful. This is his chief overarching understanding in Children of Adam. It isn't something to be ashamed of at all, he wants to argue. At 2B, of course, the anaphoria. Notice how many times the word "the" starts a line, but that repetition of 14 times at least, the word love being repeated. Again, love and love and love. It is compelling. At 3A, and how we compare this to other texts, of course, I've already mentioned Emerson's Nature, but I want us to think about the influence of Chaucer, and especially those opening lines of Canterbury Tales, and the ways in which Chaucer and Whitman will play that game of saying there are things that are natural and they should be understood as such. Well, finally at 3B, how are you going to own a poem like this? I have students that this is their favorite poem in all of Leaves of Grass. They love the spontaneity of a poem like this. What are your favorite bunches or clusters of images that you often will bring to mind that make you happy? And finally, what are your longings that he writes of as longings, and to whom do you confide these longings? It is possible that the reading of Whitman allows us to begin to try and entertain questions like this, maybe at a more serious level, maybe at a more jovial level as well. Thank you.